I am really honored and happy to be here again with Diego and you all for this very important journey. Diego asked me to give a speech on Tolkien and Aquinas, who are my two intellectual loves and are the core of my studies. Unfortunately for you, I also study and teach logic. However, today I'll try to contain my logical mind because I would like to talk as painlessly as possible about the relationship between literature and philosophy from a Tolkienian Thomistic point of view. I'll do this basing my conference on a not too famous text of Aquinas, which I'll try to examine with some Tolkienian examples and ideas. Tolkien is a storyteller and a philologist of the 20th century, while Aquinas is one of the pillars of Catholic theology who lived in the Middle Ages. However, by the end of this journey through their texts, I hope you will see how these two classics of human and Catholic culture are not as far apart as they might at first seem. Let's start with Aquinas' text, in which he comments on the metaphysics of Aristotle. Those who first philosophized and who now philosophize did so from wonder about some cause. For when we see certain obvious effects whose cause we don't know, we wonder about their cause. And since wonder was the motive which led men to philosophy, it is evident that the philosopher is, in a sense, a lover of myth. That is, a lover of myth as is characteristic of the poets. Now, the reason why the philosopher is compared to the poet is that both are concerned with wonders. For the myths which the poets deal are composed of wonders, and the philosophers themselves were moved to philosophize because of wonder. The text affirms that the poet is a lover of myth, which he produces, the myths are composed of wonders, wonder is the cause that leads men to philosophize. Therefore, also the philosopher can be seen as a lover of myth. One of the key words of the text is wonder. What does this word mean? Probably each of us considers wonder connected to something good and beautiful. However, this is not totally right. In fact, the Greek word for wonder is tauma, and tauma is the same verb that Homer uses to describe what the sight of Polyphemus the Cyclope causes. This means that true wonder is caused by something that is, at the same time, beautiful, but also perilous. In this sense, a perfect Tolkienian example of wonder is Galadriel, the elf lady of the Golden Wood Lorien, who is explicitly described as perilous or terrible and perilously fair. Therefore, we can postulate that true wonder is an emotion which moves us out of our comfort zone in search of the reason why an encountered being, such as Polyphemus or Galadriel, is so wonderful. Another key word of the text is myth. What does this mean? It is impossible to answer this question adequately. However, for us, it is enough to see what the mythical Wikipedia tells us. Now, if we look at these distinctions, the concept common to each of them is that every myth is a story, a narration. In fact, myth in Latin is translated with fabula, that in English could be better translated as story. I am quite sure that also Tolkien would have accepted that myth means story. In fact, in his famous essay on fairy stories, he brings close myths and other kinds of stories, such as epic sagas, folk tales, and fairy tales. So, if a myth is a story and is the product of a poet, we can say that the poet is, in our modern language, a storyteller, someone who produces literature in prose or in poems. Now, let's deal with the connection between myth story and wonder, a connection which is affirmed by Aquinas in his commentary. How can we explain this connection? Here again, Tolkien is very helpful, because in On Fairy Stories he also affirms that the storyteller produces story thanks to fantasy. It is fundamental to spend some time in exploring this theory based on the concept of subcreation and secondary world, which have a deep theological inspiration. For Tolkien, in fact, myth is similar to God, because as the Creator creates our primary world in which we live, man is essentially a sub-creator who is capable of subcreating secondary worlds in which we can enter with our mind. And for Tolkien, literature is the highest expression of this human subcreative power. So, these secondary worlds are all the stories that, when they are well narrated, are capable of involving the reader so deeply that it seems that he is inside the world in which the tale is set. Now, at the heart of this subcreative activity, thanks to which we can enter into the world of fairy, there is the desire to realize or encounter imagined wonders independent from our mind. And fantasy is the activity with which man can subcreate and can enter wonderful secondary worlds. Finally, we have to explain the connection between subcreation, which means literature, and philosophy. To do this, another idea by Tolkien is very, very helpful. For him, in fact, the characters of a well-narrated story are embodiments of universal problems. Please note that the characters are not symbols or allegories of something else, but they incarnate in themselves a problem through a concrete and paradigmatic situation. This means that when someone reads a description of an intense and wonderful situation, they are so amazed they feel the necessity of finding the cause of it. As an example of this double movement, the production of a story and the search of the cause, I propose you this text from The Lord of the Rings, in which, during a perilous journey, there is a wonderful meeting full of philosophical problems. I am referring to the journey of Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, and at the meeting with the riders of Rohan, in which Elmer, their captain, violating the law of Rohan, that does not allow a stranger to be released, decides to let Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas go in search of the hobbits. These are indeed strange days, he muttered. Dreams and legends spring to life out of the grass. Tell me, Lord, he said, what do you bring out of the north? The doom of choice, said Aragorn. Halflings, laughed the rider that stood beside Elmer. Halflings, but they are only a little people in old songs and children's tales out of the north. Do we walk in legends or on the green earth of the daylight? A man maybe do both. How shall a man judge what to do in such times? Said Elmer. As he ever has judged, said Aragorn. Good and ill have not changed since yesteryear, nor are they one thing among elves and dwarfs, and another among men. It is a man's part to discern them, as much in the golden wood as in his own house. True indeed, said Elmer, but I do not doubt you nor the deed which my heart would do. Yet I am not free to do all as I would. It is against our law to let strangers wander at will in our land. I do not think your law was made for such a chance, said Aragorn. The passage, as you can see, is full of wonder, and we should be struck by the intensity of the context that elucidates the universal problem of choice. It is in this sense that this text can lead to some philosophical questions like, why has Elmer let the three strangers go? Has Elmer done the right thing? If Elmer has made the right choice, what is the connection between the good and law that he violated? And finally, what is good and ill? So, a philosophical inquiry can start. And Tolkien's stories, as it is for every classic of literature, are full of this paradigmatic situation. Think of the debate at the Council of Elrond, the choice of Frodo to carry the ring, his decision not to throw it in Mount Doom, and so on. There is no time to answer to the previous questions. If you want more details, you can consult my book, which has as a cover the Riders of Rohan. The eye of my speech, in fact, is to explain how literature and philosophy are connected, connection that now, coming back to the first text of Aquinas, could be summarized in more Tolkienian and modern language as such. The storyteller is a lover of story, which she subcreates. Stories are composed of wonders. Wonders is the cause that leads men to philosophize. Therefore, also the philosopher is a lover of stories. I am quite sure that Tolkien would have agreed with this analysis that considers both the narrator and the philosopher lovers of myth. A word which in the Greek of Aristotle is philometes. In fact, it is worth noting that Tolkien employs the same word, philometus, in the subtitle of his poem Mythopoeia. Tolkien wrote this poem in the 30s after a journey with his friend C.S. Lewis. Lewis, at the time, considered myth and story as simply false. He was a misometus. Against this idea, Tolkien told him that this is not correct. To him, myths, stories, and especially fairy stories, are not false. They are secondarily true, because they are set in a secondary world that, if well subcreated, has the inner consistency of reality and can exemplify a universal problem of humanity. And this astonishing Tolkienian thesis is also connected with faith. I suppose that in your life you have had a discussion with non-believers who consider the gospel only a fairy story. I don't know how you have replied to them. Nevertheless, I would like to tell you how Tolkien would have answered. He would have substantially said that yes, the gospel is a fairy story, because, like every fairy story, the gospel is a eucatastrophe. This word means a story that, as opposed to tragedy, had a sudden joyous turn, after a situation in which it seems that everything is lost. Think of the destruction of the ring after that fraud decides not to throw it. That is similar to the resurrection of Jesus after his death. But the latter is not only secondarily true, but is primarily true. I would try to venture to say that, approaching the Christian story from this direction, it has long been my feeling, a joyous feeling, that God redeemed the corrupt making creatures, men, in a way fitting with this aspect, as to others of their strange nature. The Gospels contain a fairy story, or a story of a larger kind, which embraces all the essences of fairy stories. They contain many marvels, peculiarly artistic, beautiful, and moving, mythical in their perfect self-contained significance. And among the marvels is the greatest and most complete conceivable eucatastrophe. But this story has entered history, and the primary word, the desire and the aspiration of subcreation, has been raised to the fulfillment of creation. The birth of Christ is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. The story begins and ends with joy. It has preeminently the inner consistency of reality. And with this incredible text, that I am sure also Aquinas would have appreciated, I send you my best wishes for a journey full of true joy, love, faith, and wonder.